Good day, everybody, and welcome to the Leadspace webinar. I am very happy that you were able to join today and really appreciate your time. We are going to be talking today about the topic of your data, and we want to help you so that you can stop drowning in data drudgery and use that time to do more things like marketing, for example. I want to introduce the people on the call today, and let me start with myself. My name is June Bauer, and I work here at Leadspace, and I've been working in marketing for many, many years for many companies such as Apple, Cisco, WebEx, and Adobe. And with me today, and I'll be hosting the call, are two amazing guest speakers that we are very, very honored and happy to have join us. The first is Damon Asmus, and Damon comes to us from Symantec, where he has been working in marketing operations, and very dynamic and major part of their strategy and implementation going forward. And we also have joining us today Amish Sheth, who is the VP of Solutions Engineering at Leadspace. And Amish brings amazing experience in understanding data across many, many companies that he's had the opportunity to work with as a key member of the Leadspace team. So today, what we're going to do is talk about data, as I said, but we're going to do it as a discussion. So I'm going to be asking our panelists some questions, some things I'm interested in, and I think you will be too, and we'll be getting some honest answers from them. Hopefully, pragmatic answers to help you in managing your own data. But I also want to invite you to participate in this webinar. So what you'll see at the bottom of your screen is a button where you can ask us questions. Please click on that at any time and write your question. And we'll hold those questions till the end, but we'd really like to get your participation and your questions. And we will try to answer as many of them as we can before the end of the webinar today. So with that being said, why don't we get started? So I have a question, Damon, for you to start, which is, you know, I think we all agree dealing with data and cleaning up data is probably not our favorite job. So what was the impetus for you to decide to make cleaning up your data a priority?
Yeah, thanks for the question, June, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I think like most of us, we've just always recognized that data has been an issue. On the slide we're looking at here, we have a couple of the common complaints that we would get both from the marketing side and from the sales teams regarding, why is my target audience so small? On the sales side, I'm getting the wrong type of lead sent over, or I'm just getting bad data in general. So we had many attempts over the years to try to get this tackled. But there was really no single group responsible for the data. We had our data kind of scattered all over the company. There were different marketing teams with different groups, all of them running their own business. So that just made it really difficult for us to get our arms around it and figure out how we can just impact this on a global basis. And really what we lacked was visibility into the root problems that were causing these issues with the data. Over a couple of years ago now, we actually had the benefit of having our data consolidated into one database. We brought in Eloqua to be our marketing automation platform, and that was the impetus for bringing all the data together. So now we had all of our data consolidated into a single spot. I recognize that's not something that everybody can do, but the key was really being able to get visibility into those root problems of the data. So as we look into our next slide, we can get an example of what this looks like. And as we consolidated the data, we had over 7 fields, for example, looking at just the job roles or job level and functions of contacts. So with 7 fields, which one do you choose? Each one had a different type. We had pick lists versus text box, which is just open fields and text from a contact writing their information in. The pick list had different values, and all this was just preventing things from getting routed correctly on the sales side. Then, of course, we have field completion issues. So how can you select, say, job level as some parameter that you want to build an audience off of when you only have 3% of it completed? You're just not going to get very many contacts, obviously. And then the no standardization. So you have these number of different values that are there. And if you start trying to use keywords, you're going to miss a lot of people or bring in a lot of extras that you don't need, that type of thing. So it just made segmentation very difficult. to create those campaigns. That leads, of course, to poor campaign metrics, bad lead routing, leads being rejected, all sorts of things. And on the operations side, a lot of manual effort, a lot of inaccuracies, of course, repetitive work, eroding confidence on both the marketing and sales side, and just not having the trust from sales. Ultimately, we just didn't have a very good ROI on our campaigns.
Wow, that sounds very challenging, Damon, and a difficult situation, and I can see why that was an impetus to start looking at how to get your data in better shape. But I have a question for you, Amish. Is this a common problem that you see across many customers, or was this unique to Symantec?
Yeah, great question, June. So first off, I could definitely say, Symantec is not alone, right? I think, the data challenges that Damon just described is something I hear literally every day. Having the opportunity to work with our prospects and clients in some capacity, literally every day, these challenges come about all the time. And quite frankly, the majority of them actually don't feel confident that they have the data to execute their marketing and sales campaigns. And as you see this quote here on the slide, data, according to Forrester, is the foundation for all successful B2B marketing and sales. So, if you don't have the data you need to feel confident to execute those campaigns, really you're not able to meet the customer's expectation, right? We now live in a world where, your clients actually expect a very B2C type of experience, right? They want all communication to be very relevant and personalized to their needs. And if you don't feel confident in the data, there's really no way you can execute on those initiatives. And with the expectation of the customer, another thing we constantly hear from our conversations with the industry is, they really want to be customer first, right? Customer obsessed, customer centric, whatever term you want to use. But to really be able to meet those goals, it really starts with the data first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like data is incredibly important in good sales and marketing. So Damon, back to you then. So you showed us these slides where, quite frankly, I think some of us might feel a little intimidated with getting started with such a daunting project, but how did you get started? What did you do?
Yeah, you're right. It's a bit overwhelming when you're looking at everything and you are able to identify all those issues as they become recognizable. It is indeed a daunting project. So the first thing we wanted to do was just develop a plan, how we're going to approach this so we can put it into more digestible pieces and attack it in a more methodical way and make it a little bit less daunting. So obviously with all the complaints that we had coming in and the people who were most impacted by those by the data, we wanted to bring in those teams to get their buy-in. We wanted to understand what was most important to them and how their business processes were running. So we brought in sales and marketing, of course, and then the operations teams from both sales and marketing. They're a bit more accessible than some of the sales folks for sure. But we really wanted to understand what are the processes and how they're structured. So for example, we have teams that are handling leads from different business segments, whether it's mid-market or enterprise or named. What are the parameters that are defining those segments so that we can get them routed to the right people? So as we all come to the table to look at that and understand that those processes, it gives the team obviously a stake in ownership for fixing the data, but also gives them an appreciation for the involvement in the process. And when we're thinking about, oh, well, we'll just fix the data, standardize it, and enrich it, it sounds a lot more simple than it actually is. It gets quite complex. So it gives them that appreciation, which is helpful in a long-term buy-in. First thing we had to do is identify and prioritize the fields and values. So as we looked before at the job function, job level, and on the next slide, we'll see we were able to consolidate those from 7 fields down to 3. So we still wanted to get have some fields to be broad enough to create those segments, but also enough to have those conversations going on the sales side. So we ended up with job function, job level, and that helps with segmentation. It's easy to put on a form. You have the pick lists available there. People can self-select that, and that goes into the segmentation later. We didn't think we'd get much use out of title from a marketing standpoint because the keywords can get very difficult to go through, and you often have those gaps of people being left out because they didn't type it exactly as we would expect it to be, that sort of thing. But sales really appreciated having it on that side. So as the data comes through, we route that over to them. It gives them ability to see what the contact is saying about what their role is in their own words, and it helps with the conversation to get to know who they actually are talking to. So as we prioritize these fields, settled on the values that should be appearing in the fields, we then brought in our IT team. So it's going to vary by organization, but for us, IT handles the infrastructure and the fields within the contact table. And they did some of that consolidation and built those pick lists for us. And as we did that consolidation, we had to settle the conflicts between two different fields. So if a record, for example, had data in both fields, we had to figure out which one was the most accurate, the most recent, and most valuable to us. So those rules had to be decided upon when you're prioritizing and merging that data. But then, of course, we had to fill in the gaps. We see now that we have a lot of gaps in the data. It's probably inaccurate given the age of some of these contacts that we have in our system, and it's not been standardized yet. And we do our best there to run some programs and standardize the values that we're seeing, but it's just not going to help 100% across the board. And that's where we needed to go for some outside help. For that, we looked at a few of the enrichment vendors that are out there, and to select the right vendor for us, we did a comparison between the results of how good they could do. And so what we did was we sent 10,000 records to each of the vendors that we were considering. Very basic information, email address, first name, last name, and company. And then as the results came in, we compared the criteria of what came in based off of match rate. Of course, how many could they find? The record completion rate, could you find more than just the information we sent to you in the first place, which was sometimes the case? What are the fields provided? Are you looking for personal information, company information? We found a few gems in there that we weren't expecting to find, like website was helpful, and LinkedIn links, for example, those things that might help sales conversations could get going. The ability to match the values that we needed. So we spent a lot of time figuring out what are the values that are needed to route leads through our processes or to identify them for campaigns. We couldn't just simply accept what the vendor was providing. We needed to convert those into what we needed to help our processes run. And then lastly, other services that might be available. So obviously we wanted to mature our contact strategy over time, and can we find a vendor that would be able to grow and provide services to us to help us do that. And ultimately we ended up with Leadspace.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you had to start by figuring out how to organize your data and then where to get data and the enrichment that you needed. And I'm wondering, Amish, this process, is this something that you've seen across other companies? I know you've worked with a lot of big companies like Microsoft, HP, Google, RingCentral, Oracle, and I know many others. And you know, is this your experience with all of them as well, or is this something that you see as unique to Symantec?
No, great question, June. I definitely see this across the board. You know, if I were to sum up, you know, kind of Damon's thoughts and approach, first off, I'd echo kind of his strategy and how we went about, you know, evaluating the data that he needed and, you know, using the criteria they set aside for, you know, their success to determine the right vendor. But ultimately, you know, it kind of could be boiled down into three key areas, as you see on the screen here. You know, first off, you know, you definitely want to do a data bake-off, right? There's a lot of data vendors out there. There's different types of data providers that collect their data differently. And you want to make sure that you can do a quantitative analysis to compare what kind of data you're actually going to get for your specific market, right? You have different buyers and companies and people you might target. So the best way to actually do an evaluation is to actually do a bake-off. One thing I would add in terms of some success criteria you might want to consider as you do a data bake-off, in addition to what Damon mentioned, right? Definitely want to check out the match rate, make sure that the completion rates for the key business fields that you care about, you know, they're able to fulfill those values. But definitely don't underestimate, you know, validating the accuracy of the data that's provided, right? A lot of vendors out there can certainly find data and complete a field, but are they actually coming back with the right value? So as you, again, think about these data bake-offs and your success criteria, ensure you have a plan in place to do some sort of accuracy assessment as well. Second off, you know, Damon alluded it towards the end and how they ultimately decide to pick Leadspace, but you know, it's always easier to think about short-term, right? I have this data problem that's right in front of me today. I have to get this, you know, lead routing problem solved. Maybe it's segmentation, whatever that may be. And it might be a project that's going to take 3 months, 6 months, what have you. But then what? So what I definitely encourage you to do is think about what kind of data partner is going to be the right fit for your longer term data strategy, right? Once you're done with your near term projects, you're going to move on to the next project that might require a different data set. The last thing you really want to do is get back into the market and have to evaluate a bunch of vendors. Ultimately, that might result in you having to figure out how to integrate different platforms together, which can become quite the headache when it comes to just overall data management. So definitely encourage you to think kind of forward-looking as you think about the right partner. And then lastly, with all the new compliance laws, in particular GDPR, there's the California privacy law that's coming out. Make sure that you do your due diligence to determine how are they actually acquiring this data, and the process in which they use, does it actually adhere to your legal team, your privacy laws internally, to make sure that you're working with the right partner, that you feel comfortable with how they actually acquire the data that you're going to leverage.
Okay, wow, that's really good advice, Amish, and helpful thinking about how to find the right data vendor. But let's get back to the Symantec story. So Damon, I'm going to turn back to you and ask you now, you've decided you need to do something about your data. You figured out how you want to organize it. You found yourself a data vendor. Now what? Now what are the first steps that you're going to take on in fixing your problem?
Sure. So going back to our plan there, we really wanted to start with the basics, and we wanted to look at our existing contact base. So with everything consolidated into that one view, our infrastructure is now in place. We now needed to validate the data. We wanted to make sure, of course, we're standardizing those values that we have in the data and then filling in the gaps by enriching it. So as I mentioned, our contacts had been scattered throughout our organization, and they were all been brought together. Some of those contacts were several years old. Embarrassingly old. We wanted to make sure that we had actually good contacts in there. And this is the first step to do, because you don't want to go through enrichment or standardization of contacts you don't even need anyway. It's just not cost effective. So we went through and evaluated these contacts. It was, just a key, of course. I think we're all familiar for the marketing side of things. It protects our sender reputation. It helps us give a more accurate audience size of who we're going to be sending the campaigns to. And also, ultimately, it gives us a better expectations and results for the campaigns we're sending. So for us, when we went through this validation process, we actually ended up cleaning out over 400,000 contacts from our data. Again, kind of an embarrassingly old set amount there, but we felt much more confident in the data that was left over. And then we turned to standardization and enrichment. So that's filling in our blank values, correcting invalid values, and then just correcting flat out bad data. So for example, if you have a number where a range is needed or something like that, it's just, we know that the number or value is there, but it's not accurate in the sense of what we needed it to represent for our processes. So to prepare for the enrichment side of things, we need to determine what our rules for updating data might be. This is going to vary, of course, by organization and what you're trying to accomplish, but you could just simply fill in the blanks that you have, or you can overwrite everything that you have with the data being received, or maybe a combination of the two. If you're going to go with the route of filling in blanks only, then you need to do an extra step in between by removing anything that might provide a false positive. So in other words, you want to get rid of the data that is bad, recognizably and obviously bad in your system. So for example, if you have a phone number that has 5 characters in it, that's probably not a valid phone number. Get rid of letters in numeric fields. So again, going back to company size, if you have any letters in there, that's probably not going to be representative of a good company size or range. Any of the blacklisted words that you might have, people get obviously creative in their form field submissions, so those could be pretty easily recognized and removed as well. Then your common strings, ASDF, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that type of thing. So those get cleared out. That then leaves the null value in the field to be able to bring in that good data coming in. As we're looking at the next slide here, we had some great results from our enrichment. Company size was and is a crucial field for us from a lead routing perspective. It's one of the main definitions in how a business segment is created in the sales teams that cover these groups. So we were obviously ecstatic to fill in the blanks. We had over 460,000 contacts that were actually populated and filled in that we can now recognize and use for both segmentation and lead routing. But we also noticed that we had a lot of the corrections in there. So you see at the top of the screen on the slide here, we had a lot of 1 to 10 group and 11 to 50 recategorized into the other ranges. because we simply had bad data. And the problem here was that those are the fields that are at the top of our pick list. So people might be getting a little bit lazy about filling in their forms as they come in and just selecting whatever's at the top of the row. So it's just another valid piece of information that we need to get corrected as part of the enrichment process, and then available for creating those campaigns and ultimately making our sales teams happy.
Yeah, wow, this is interesting. So what you're saying is you validated, standardized, and enriched your data, and that's how you started. And what's interesting to me, especially about this last slide, is that the data, while it's definitely helping you understand and know your customers better, is also helping you to build a better relationship with the sales team, in that routing is part of the issue when you don't have good data. If you don't have good data, you don't know who to route to. And, you know, having been a marketer my entire life, I know that sales sometimes can be a little upset if they're not getting the leads that they think they should be getting, because you can't figure out how to route. So I think that's awesome and really interesting. And I guess turning to you, Amish, it's a question of this idea of validating, standardizing, and enriching. Is that something you would recommend to all of our attendees on the webinar today? Is that how they should get started if they're interested in taking advantage of this?
Absolutely. I think the approach that Damon and team took is, how you really should think about, setting your database and getting the right foundation for you to really now start to enhance how you can leverage data to do your marketing and sales. A couple of things I'll add. I know Damon touched on it briefly, but just to kind of elaborate a bit of the initial cleanse validation approach, right? I think by nature, most people think if you have a bunch of bad data in your database, emails that maybe worked at one point but now bounced, the initial assumption is you should just delete them or purge them. But there's actually a better way to try to realize more value out of those leads that were once good that went bad. And the thought in the use case we kind of talk about there is database reactivation, right? If you look at many reports across the industry, I think the average number you'll see in any of these reports is about 2 to 3% of a B2B database decays monthly. And that's because, people are switching jobs and maybe they get promoted. There's just switching roles or functions. And so the information you have is outdated. And so by being able to socially verify and determine where a person may have moved to, there's a bunch of new leads you can actually surface as part of this cleanse process. And just to kind of give you one example here, we work with Salesforce today, and one of the initial engagement projects we worked with them on was to take about 1 million records from, one segment of their very, very large database. And as a result of that, we found over 100,000 net new leads that they could then send off to sales. So it's a very cost-effective way to reactivate your database. It's much cheaper than going out and buying net new leads. And these people are in your database for a reason. So they actually tend to convert quite better, right? Think about your champions and influencers that maybe went to a new company, and the ability to follow them and then re-engage them at that new employer. So just kind of one use case I wanted to touch on there. In addition to that, I think I'll add one more point around kind of the ongoing strategy of, maintaining the database, right? You go in and you cleanse your database initially, you get the good foundation set up, but the job's not done there, right? It's an ongoing task to maintain the quality of your database. So I'd encourage you to make sure that you think about the longer term strategy of how you're going to, keep the records up to date, make sure as you generate new leads from your online forums, trade shows, et cetera, you're qualifying, enriching, and maintaining the quality of your database moving forward.
Okay, interesting and very helpful. Thanks for those tips. So getting back to you and Symantec. So you had your data, you had better data, you had enriched your data. What did you take on as your next set of challenges?
Right. So again, going back to our plan with the trying to make it a less overwhelming task, we now have gotten to a point where we've enriched our existing data. So the next step, of course, is now we have a database that we're comfortable with. We want to make sure that we're not allowing the garbage back in and corrupting or polluting our database as new leads and contacts flow in. So as we're looking at the slide, it's a very basic, just overview of our process. So it's probably very familiar to many of us here on the call. But we need to identify the sources of new contacts, form submissions, data uploads, maybe an API with other vendors you're working with, and of course, sync to, in our case, SFDC, but from a CRM, where sales might be entering in new contacts for you. All of those get routed back to our central marketing contact database. So we want to make sure that we're ensuring quality here, because these are the leads, of course, that are coming in. These are the people who are most interested, and we want to ensure that those values coming in aren't doing anything to just slowly pollute our data again. So what we decided to do was to automate the enrichment of contacts coming in, and that's where you can see the loop here coming in from the marketing contact database. As part of the lead creation program and process, we're actually sending the contacts as one of the early steps up to Leadspace and back to get enriched before getting routed over to SFGC. So here again, you want to consider the rules of enrichment. It might vary a bit from enriching the existing database, because that's more of a static activity. And also, as you're working on this project, things might change over time. So I'm going to show a while back mentioned GDPR. So here in this case, we're overriding everything in our case. You may choose just to fill in the gaps, or you may have the hybrid of the two. So due to GDPR, we decided to not do anything about the location information for a contact, and just trust the data that they provided to us. That gives us then a paper trail that we can, say was directly sourced from the contact, not anything we did to it. But that's the only case that we take into consideration. So the location information being the country, of course, and then state and zip code. We'll only fill that in if it's blank. But so far, the results of this process have been really promising. We have them noted there at the bottom of the slide. Before enrichment, or any lead that's sent over that hasn't been enriched, sales is rejecting at those at about a 25% clip. So 1 in every 4 was rejected on bad data alone. But now, once they are being enriched, that's dropped by 20 percentage points down to about 5%. And obviously, we'll never get to a point of perfection as much as we'd like to. But that's a considerable advantage, and obviously sales is getting much happier with those results, and we're really building that trust. Another area that we're looking at, not shown on the slide here, but from the segmentation side of thing, we definitely got improvement from our standardization and enrichment. We showed earlier those job level and job function fields, and it was definitely a step up, but it was still too high level, so we always want to continue to hone that a bit. So what we wanted to do then was build personas that we could use for the targeting purpose. To do this, we analyzed our contacts and grouped the contacts by like criteria, so a like-to-like comparison, and figured out which ones were most represented in our data. Looking at title, job function, job level, some of the keywords that might be associated with the contact that we were able to receive. What department are they from? Maybe communities they belong to, that sort of thing, and they all get labeled as a persona, which is, again, a bit more granular than the job level and job function. This really helped from a campaign creation perspective, from a touch governance standpoint, so we can cordon off groups of contacts in a much more flexible way. It gave us better audience creation, again, being able to try to pinpoint better those audiences that we think would like to hear from the campaigns that we're sending more accurately. And to test that, we're able to test much easier. So we have the ability to do more A/B testing to see what the results of our campaigns ultimately are going to be.
Okay, wow. So you're starting to see through the work that you've done on getting better data and automating enrichment, the power of what good data can do to improve your marketing, which is really exciting. And you bring up this concept of personas, and I'm wondering, Amish, I sometimes think what a persona is, but I think the next marketer, or maybe some people on our call may be wondering, when you guys talk about personas, what's the real definition? I mean, what is a persona to us, especially as it relates to data, cleaning up your data and enriching your data?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up that point, June. I think the term persona is probably one of the more loosely used terms in the industry, where it has many different meanings to people, as well as many different meanings to the companies that talk about personas. And so let me kind of set a little context around how you should be thinking about personas, and how, first and foremost, the kind of the use cases, right? So as we think about personas, it's kind of a twofold solution, right? One is you have your existing database and you have these inbound leads that come in, and you want to be able to segment them better into your unique buyer personas. The second is, you might be doing a lot of outbound ABM type of campaigns, and you might not always have the right people to target. So it's more of a targeting question in trying to acquire the right people through the lens of a persona. Now, as we specifically talk about personas versus kind of what might be stated in the industry per se, it starts with titles, right? To some companies, just job title targeting is what they refer to as a persona. The challenge with that approach alone is, job titles are more unique and more varied today than ever. There's more job titles coming out every single day, and being able to try to keep track of that and use that as your main means of segmentation becomes really, really manual and challenging. The other approach is trying to bucket those job titles into their corresponding department and level. So if you look at this screen here, we kind of have an example of the different attributes that can go into a persona. And if you look here in particular, if we took the job titles and we bucket them into department and level for this client that we anonymized here, it would have stated that the majority of their buyers were IT staff level people. While that's good for them to know, they're a company that has a portfolio of different IT products. They sell security solutions, networking solutions, cloud computing solutions. And so that doesn't really give them enough information to be able to really personalize the message when they, reach out, whether it be through marketing or sales. And so what we do, and when we talk about personas here at Leadspace, it's really about getting down to the roles and responsibilities, right? What do these IT professionals actually do? Because they're not all equal. They have different actual day-to-day responsibilities. And so if you look at these job functions there towards the bottom left, we start to identify who are the individuals that really excel in, business intelligence, who are the folks that care about business continuity or information security, et cetera. That combined with the job titles, as well as products and technologies that people have used throughout their career. That can give you a good indication if they're going to really be compelled by your value proposition if they've used a similar product or a competing product in the past. So by combining all these additional data points, it gives you a much more granular understanding of your buyers. And now you can segment them into the actual personas that allow you to take action in a very automated way. Because now the end result is on the upper right, the persona segments. So instead of thinking of them as IT staff level professionals, we know who's in IT management, who's infrastructure professional, who cares about security, et cetera. And, as an example, you can see the quote there at the bottom for Microsoft. It's the exact same challenge they face. So they have their cloud and enterprise business for which they generate a ton of inbound demand on a daily basis. And their two key products that they were having trouble just really optimizing their conversions for the inbound traffic were their Azure product, which is their cloud hosting product, as well as their Power BI, which is their business intelligence. Now, each one of these, very similar to kind of the screenshot up there of the different examples, they're both IT professionals that they targeted. So our ability to take a historical analysis of who they've sold those individual products to, take their subjective inputs and what they think the characteristics of a Power BI buyer looks like versus the Azure, we built these two unique personas. So now every inbound lead that comes into Microsoft, we enrich in real time within seconds. We then bucket them into the Azure or Power BI persona. That allows Microsoft to, from day one, nurture them with the right content and the right message. And that ultimately has led to a 2x increase in their lead conversion rates with essentially taking advantage of these personas.
Okay, wow, this is actually incredibly cool as a marketing person to think that I could have this depth of understanding of my customers and my prospects. And I think one thing that I'm thinking about here is that to get here, I've got to do what Damon did, which is to figure out how to organize my data, figure out how to make sense of my data, figure out how to enrich my data, figure out how to keep that data enriched on an ongoing basis. And then what I've got, if I'm willing to do that work, is a really valuable asset that I can use to start to do some incredible marketing. And to me, this is very exciting personas. So thanks for sharing that, both Damon and Amish. So wondering, Damon, now that you've done this work, what are you thinking your next marketing projects or sales projects are going to be on top of this data? And maybe you can just inspire us with some exciting things that you're planning to do.
Yeah, sure. We have a few things in mind. Obviously, you and Amish both mentioned the diligence around keeping the data clean is first and foremost. So keeping the eye on the ball there. A colleague of mine used to state that, the only clean database is an empty database. And unfortunately, that's not really an option for us here. So we just want to make sure that we're always maintaining our diligence around the data. If any processes change, if any new sources of data come in, all of them are incorporated into some manner of enrichment process to make sure that the data is clean coming in, and it's always maintained and kept fresh. But some of the other initiatives that we haven't really embarked on yet, but we're looking to do here in the near future, we want to understand how we're doing in attracting the right contacts. So we'd like to work together to do some analysis on the total addressable market. So using those personas and maybe a segment by country or by business segment, how many, just to make something up, IT managers do we have in the United States at the mid-market level? If we can identify how many we have versus how many are out there, we can see if we're attracting the right contacts, or do we have good coverage in that segment already? And this kind of data will feed into our contact acquisition strategy to make sure we're doing the right things and getting the right messages out there. We'll also look at intent. I know it's been mentioned a few times, and that's obviously hot along the industry right now, but we also want to figure out what companies are looking at our site, our third-party sites that are interested in our type of products. Then once we have those bits of data in-house, we can figure out if we have those contacts in place and work to send our information to them as well. The persona thing is definitely hot. We always want to make sure that we're honing those definitions that go into those personas and possibly even developing new ones. Adding in maybe a propensity score for outbound communications and identifying those contacts most interested at the right time. And ultimately building out sort of a buying center model, because we know for our products especially, we don't have any single person making the decision to buy. So we're trying to hone those personas to the point where we can identify the right buying center, the group of people that would always be involved in that purchase and decision making, so we can get the right information over to them and keep them engaged in conversations with our sales. So several things. Like I said, the strategy and technology is always developing, so it's never really going to be an ending process, but those are a few of the things that we're looking at doing next.
Yeah, those are actually very interesting and exciting. I mean, I think intent, of course, is a buzzword, but a very important point in understanding your customer, because you may know the exact people or person who is interested, but knowing when they are interested can really change how your sales teams go about prioritizing leads. So I think that's super interesting, and all that you're doing, I think, also in terms of buying centers is super compelling, because it's not just one person typically in a buying cycle, and knowing who those people are and the roles they play is really important. So Amish, let me turn to you now, and I know I read in a recent Forrester Wave report, it was on CDP and it came out this year. It was interesting talking about the vendors in the space, and the thing that Forrester started with in the report was that in order to be customer obsessed, you had to have good data, and it was absolutely essential. And I thought that was a great point, because sometimes we think, data drudgery, it's a pain, but the reality is, for us to be good marketers, we've got to get that data cleaned up, we've got to get that data enriched, and then we have to put that data to use as an asset. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, having worked with all these customers, tell us some of the things that once customers have gotten their database cleaned up and enriched, that they've been able to do to be customer obsessed.
Yeah, sure thing. So as we go on to the next slide here, a quick visual on, kind of helping everyone on the call here understand, what exactly does a CDP actually mean? So the acronym stands for a customer data platform. And, today, based on our conversation and all the things that Symantec has leveraged within Leadspace, we've really been focused on, the bottom layer, right? The Leadspace data management. And, to June's point there, it all starts with data, right? You could decide to go to the next flashy object and go focus on intent or predictive scores as a use case. But if you don't fix the underlying data problems, at some point they're going to come back and become issues when it comes to trying to improve the overall efficiency of how you operate from a marketing and sales standpoint. So, definitely a first step is getting that data foundation right. More specifically, from a data management standpoint, today you see the areas in gray highlighted. These are really how Symantec has been leveraging our CDP today. The person signals and company signals, Our whole philosophy is, we have a very data agnostic approach. We don't claim to have all the data you'll ever need, but what we want to do is provide a platform that helps you unify and manage that data in a way that's going to be less painful. So you don't have to spend your time doing data work all the time. You can spend your time doing more of the creative marketing stuff that you enjoy to do. And so from a data standpoint, a couple of the other use cases, just to touch on what else is possible, and June referred to the intent there. Once you got the foundational data, you might want to start to understand, what companies might be in market based on activity that's happening on the third party. Maybe they're not engaged with your company today, but they're researching content and consuming, downloads, watching videos that indicate they might be in market for one of your products and solutions. We have those types of data sets that we can bring to the table to help you then try to get in front of some of these clients. Additionally, as we talk about ABM, I think one thing that's very critical if you are thinking about investing in your ABM strategy is ensuring that you have a solution in place for lead to account matching. A lead will come in, they'll fill out a form, and they can provide whatever company name information they want. It comes in all different forms. And your account name that you have in the database, might be different. So ensuring that all the people get associated to the right account so you can truly target any person within an account as you launch these ABM plays is absolutely critical, as well as understanding kind of the account hierarchies, how different accounts relate to each other, i.e., parent-child relationships. So those are a few additional kind of use cases in how you could tap into the data management layer even further. Now, above and beyond that, it's how do you make sense of this data and really leverage it in a way for your various use cases? Because, all data is not going to be useful in its raw form. You want to be able to add some additional intelligence to make it easier to activate and operationalize it. And so we have a couple different ways we think about, AI, predictive, machine learning, whatever buzzword you want to use. They're all floating around there today. 4 different business use cases. So on the left, we have this concept of a lookalike. Most businesses at some point in their maturity curve, they're going to either go into new markets, maybe launch new products, where you don't have a ton of historical data, but you kind of have an idea of what type of company is an ideal fit. So we have this ability to help you find high value lookalike accounts with very few examples of data. The persona scores, we talked at length on that, so I'm not going to really jump in that again. But the predictive scores, this is a way to, I think in the industry is more commonly referred to as kind of the propensity models. The idea there is, you might have some specific business outcomes you want to predict. For example, bigger deals. Who's going to become a customer? Who might buy a specific product? Cross-sell, upsell. This is where we can analyze a lot of your historical data around who you've sold to, the rest of the data that's in your funnel, and help build this predictive scoring model where we can rank all your existing database, as well as identify accounts that have never engaged with you that you should be proactively selling to because they look like a company that would buy. And then lastly, just the intent score. We talked about the intent data in the previous layer, but we take a similar approach to intent as we do to just data in general, in that it's agnostic, right? We have some partners we work with today where you could license the intent data directly from us, but you might have your own intent providers you work with. And the way we've built our platform is, we make it easy for us to ingest that data so you can work with whatever best in breed data source you want, including your first party intent. And the idea is to make it easier for you to operationalize the scores for marketing and sales into one simple score from a variety of potential intent sources. And then lastly, the activation layer. So today we focused a lot on kind of how it all works on the marketing side. We have integrations with Salesforce and how we could operationalize it more from a sales perspective. A new solution we just recently launched for ads to help you get this data and intelligence into your advertising and top of the funnel campaigns, as well as a Leadspace UI to do a lot of self-serve capabilities to execute these use cases on your own.
So it sounds to me like there are so many opportunities to be customer obsessed when you have your data cleaned up and enriched, and these are some very exciting things. Talk to us a little bit about ABM and the use cases there.
Yep, absolutely. And just to kind of wrap it up, just want to end with one kind of quick use case around ABM, right? ABM is a big buzz. Everyone's trying to figure out their ABM strategy. And this is an example of how we worked with SAP. The real business goal was around trying to acquire new logos for some strategic accounts they wanted to sell into, as well as how they could expand the products and solutions they've sold into existing customers. And ultimately, the way we helped them, we kind of broke it down into two key areas. Now, how we can provide more account intelligence, enhancing the data they had from a firmographic, competitive install about companies that are potentially using a competitor and how they could create, win-back campaigns, if you will, and using some of these additional intensity, propensity and intent triggers to time the engagement at the right accounts. And then from a people perspective, using the personas and all that key persona data that we mentioned earlier to really ensure that they're targeting the people with the right message at the right time. The net result there was they were able to see a 30% increase in net new pipeline generation across new logos and cross-sell upsell in their global campaigns.
Wow, that's an impressive number. And I'm sure as B2B marketers, most of us probably run ABM programs all the time. It's probably the meat and potatoes of our marketing. So very powerful. So I think we're coming to the point where we would like to turn to our audience and take some of your questions. And so if you haven't had a chance to jot them down, please jot them down, and we'll start with a few that we have from earlier in the session. So the first one, Damon, is for you, which is, it sounds like it was an arduous process. How long did it take to get this transition complete?
Yeah, great question. I think the results are going to vary depending on the size of the data that you're trying to work through and the complexity of the data and basically the initial quality. For us, we had set aside a quarter, 3 months to work on this. It actually took quite a bit longer than that for us because we had other things come into place. This was right at the time GDPR became a priority. But with that being said, the results have been phenomenal. So, every bit of time and effort is worth it to get through that. And again, you just got to keep your eyes on the ball and make sure that you're getting through to get to that quality data because it really helps everything else down the road. So it took a little bit longer for us, but definitely worth the time.
Okay, interesting. So here's one, Amish, for you, which is, so you talked a lot about and gave examples of large companies. Does this same methodology apply to mid-sized companies?
Yeah, I know a lot of the examples, of course, were some of the larger companies we work with, but we absolutely work with mid-market companies. And I think, quite frankly, the data challenges and the discussion we had today apply to companies of all sizes and all verticals. Because, in my day, I've worked here now for 4 years. I've yet to come across a customer that said, I have no data problems, right? There's always ways to improve your data, because there's so many different use cases that data can be dependent on. So in short, yeah, absolutely. We do have ways to work with mid-sized companies. We have great examples of how we are working with mid-sized companies, and we'd love to share some of those stories. So if anyone does have any follow-up requests, we'd be happy to set up some time to go over some of those additional examples as well.
Great. Very helpful. Thank you. And Damon, back to you with this one. So Damon, what was the most challenging part of the process to date?
Yeah, essentially, it's herding the cats. We had a number of complaints coming in from marketing and sales, as we talked about earlier in the call. But the people lose focus on that. From our team, we're focused on it. We have the plan in place. We are going through and tackling the data. But those who initiate the complaints or maybe are on the tertiary side of the project itself aren't as close to it. So it's that communication, is keeping everybody involved, keeping their eye on the prize and making sure everybody's focused on getting the data clean, because they'll always have the complaints but forget the root problem, and keeping them focused on that through a good communication to your constituents was key for us. But getting their attention often was proven to be pretty challenging. That was probably the number one thing for us.
Okay. That's so people always are one of the biggest challenges in any large project like this, but it sounds like you handled it incredibly well and were able to manage people through a very big project and a very big company as well. So I got a few questions here from a number of people on intent, Amish. So people are asking about intent. It is the hot topic of the day. So how does intent fit into all of this? A couple of questions around, do I need another vendor for that? Does Leadspace do intent? Maybe you can talk about that a bit.
Yes, absolutely. So intent, definitely a hot topic. I feel like every conversation I have these days, it comes up at some point. There's, I guess, let me start by talking about, just at a high level, the different types of intent that are available, right? There's the notion of first-party intent and third-party intent, right? First-party intent is where prospects or customers are engaging directly with your brand, right? They come to your website, they're visiting certain web pages, downloading content. That's that first-party intent. There's ways to, based on their IP address, track which company it is, and anonymously understand what companies are consuming content before they ever fill out a form. So that's kind of one flavor of anonymous first-party intent. Then when they happen to fill out a form, they end up in your marketing automation system, right? In this case, for Symantec, Eloqua, starting to track that behavior, right? The email opens, the clicks, and all that first-party behavior with your assets, if you will. So that's one part of intent where, you as a company, you have your own first-party intent that we can work with that data and essentially combine it with the notion of what we call third-party intent. And third-party intent comes in many different forms. Today, through Leadspace, we actually do have a couple native sources we partner with. Bombor and Kickfire were two that you saw on the slide before, where essentially you could get access to that data through our platform directly. You could, already have a license to those vendors or other vendors separately, and we could then bring that data into how we process in our customer data platform. And the goal for bringing that data into our platform versus creating another integration through their application is just one less integration to manage. And the way that we have a lot of expertise around standardizing, normalizing data, and then creating some of these intent scores, it'll make it much easier for your marketing and sales teams to execute and leverage all the different types of intent data, because we really synthesize it down to what you really need to know to be able to take that next best action.
Okay, wow, that was interesting. So very helpful to understand intent. And intent is one of those things that when you do get your data cleaned up and enriched, it's something that you can definitely take advantage of. So an exciting thing to look forward to. Well, we are about to run out of time. So I know there's a few more questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them today, but I would like to close by thanking our fabulous speakers today. So Damon Asmus from Symantec. Damon, thank you so much for joining us. And Amish Sheth, the VP of Solution Engineering at Leadspace. I learned so much from both of you, and it was interesting and enlightening, and I feel ready to get up and go start fixing my data. And I'm hoping that all of you who joined today feel so inclined as well. I want to thank our entire audience for taking time out of your busy day. I know this is something that falls right in the middle of a work day, and so we really, really appreciate you taking the time to come out and listen to what our experts have to say. And I do want to invite you to come to our next webinar, which will be in April, and we will be letting you know the date and the topic very soon, so please look for that. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.